Welcome, everybody. My name is George Perkovich. I'm a Vice President for Studies here at the Carnegie Endowment, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here today. We are distinctly pleased to have Catherine Ashton, the European Union's new Commissioner for Trade, with us today to discuss the challenges facing the EU and the U.S. in the global economic crisis. In particular, Commissioner Ashton will address not only how we best keep the global economy open, but also how promoting free trade in the midst of the current financial and economic distress is vital to all of our interests. Catherine Ashton was born in Upholland in Lancashire, from where she took her title Baroness Ashton of Upholland when she became a British life peer in 1999. She's held a number of senior positions in the British government and was appointed leader of the House of Lords and Lord President of the Council in Gordon Brown's first cabinet in 2007. Commissioner Ashton brings to her new position significant European experience. Among other things, she steered the Lisbon Treaty through the UK's upper chamber, which, as other countries have found, wasn't so easy to do through parliaments. She's also an experienced international negotiator, having been responsible for negotiating the international trade and legal services with India and South Africa. The Commissioner has generously agreed to take questions after her opening remarks, and my colleague Sandra Pulaski, the Director of our International Trade and Equity Program, will moderate that discussion. So let me again welcome all of you, and especially Commissioner Ashton, and give the floor to you. Thank you.
George, very much. George, Sandra, colleagues, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here. I thought I might start by explaining to you a little bit about a baroness, and I can do no better than telling you what my daughter Rebecca said when I was made a baroness in 1999, when she was 7 years old. She went to school to be asked by her head teacher, Rebecca, do you know what's happened to Mummy? And Rebecca said, oh yes, Mrs. Scruton, my mummy's become a baroness. And her teacher said, yes, Rebecca, but what does that mean? And she said, oh, Mrs. Scruton, it's very easy. She's halfway between a politician and a princess. To her eternal chagrin, I'm far too much like the politician and not enough like the princess. But it's a great delight, and everybody calls me Kathy, so when we get to questions, please, I hope you'll feel able to do the same. It's a great delight to be here and to have this opportunity. For me, the greatest part of it will be when we're able to have our conversation at the end. So I'd like to, in my speech, take you on a journey with me on why I think it's so important that here we are facing these difficult times with trade so much a part of the agenda. But to begin with, you know, it's been mentioned already that I grew up in Lancashire in England, and I grew up in a very small village. No one in my family had ever visited America, but we all knew what the American dream meant, and I suppose secretly we all wanted to be American. So much so, in fact, that my brother, who came to high school here as an 18-year-old, decided there and then that he was going to find his way back to the country he fell in love with, and spent the next 15 years finding jobs that could lead him here. He's now very proud to be an American citizen and to have raised his family in Missouri, and I'm very proud to be part of an American family. But the main reason, I suppose, we looked back on those days and thought of America was the films and the programmes that were beamed into our living room. We saw the land of the free, founded on the principles of liberty and opportunity, where working hard was the route to success and where anything was possible. The America I grew up with was an outward-looking force for good in the world, a nation that defined itself not so much by what it was, but by what it had the potential to be, a nation open to trade, open to services, and above all, open to ideas. I believe the European Union shares these ideals. We are a large, open economy. We believe in democracy, in liberty and openness. These are the principles that the European community was founded on in the 1950s, and they bind our member states together to this day. I think today we're at one of those moments in history when we need to remember what we stand for. We're faced with the worst economic slump for 80 years, a global economic slump, and the temptation to retreat back into our shells, to pull down the blinds and shut out the world, faces us all. It's a natural instinct when faced with a challenge on the scale of the one that we currently face. But sometimes retreat's the wrong reaction. Retreating to the safety of our own domestic markets is certainly a huge mistake. We all know it's what tipped recession into depression in the 1930s and what could turn downturn into downfall today. So the choice we face is between doing something what is popular but damaging in the short term and what's right and sustainable in the medium to long term. The European Union is staking its claim on the latter, and I believe the United States should do too. I say this because I've seen doubts creeping in here and there about the United States' commitment to open markets. I suppose the concern is that the United States system and public opinion have fundamentally shifted, that President Obama may not adhere to the principles of free trade that have made the United States the economic superpower it is. Actually, I don't believe for a moment that those fears are true. The United States knows it has everything to lose and nothing to gain from turning inwards. The USA is $1 trillion per year richer as a result of its integration within the global trading system over the past half-century. And interestingly, it's the improvement in the United States trade balance which provided all United States economic growth, all of it, in 2008. Whatever the difficulties, and there are some, in specific sectors, it's vital that we keep those thoughts in our minds. And that's why I'm here, partly to meet the new administration. I will see Ron Kirk, who I hope will be my new counterpart shortly when the vote has taken place, and I'm looking forward very much to working with him and his team to drive forward both the multilateral and the bilateral agenda. I'm under no illusion. We should be under no illusion. The current economic situation is extremely serious, and it's almost certain to get a little worse before it starts to get better. The World Bank now predicts a fall in global output in 2009, not just trade, but output. This year will experience the first decline in global trade since 1982. Unemployment is currently above 8% in the United States. For the first time in my working life, it's as high here as in the European Union at 8%. But it will get better. And when it does, we'll be judged on how we reacted when the pressure was on. To put it another way, our future credibility depends on how we act now. Some governments are starting to feel the pressure to move to shield their economies from a difficult economic environment. You hear talk of raising tariffs and non-tariff barriers, of unfairly subsidising exports, of introducing local content requirements in stimulus packages. At the moment, it's very difficult to assess how economically important these are individually, but they carry the risk of what could be a widespread protectionist backlash. The only result of this, in my view, would be an even larger decline in world trade. But there's a risk I might be misunderstood here. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we should sit back and let the downturn take its course. It's absolutely right and proper that governments invest in their economies, in their industries, in their workforce, to protect people in the broadest sense of that word. But that's entirely different from protectionism. Protecting people means equipping them to compete in the world, not trying to pretend the world doesn't exist or that economic forces can be held back. It means investing in education and in innovation. And it means supporting small businesses by helping them to identify export opportunities. In the European Union, we have 23 million small and medium-sized enterprising. They represent more than 99% of European businesses, 70% of all jobs, but only 3% of them export outside of the European Union. And that's something that I've been working to change to help them grow and develop. Open markets, too, can seem sometimes like an abstract concept, but they're the only way forward, given the challenges that we face. Open markets deliver huge benefits for both Europe and America, both economic on both the supply and the demand side, in terms of opportunities for our businesses and greater choice for our consumers. But equally importantly, politically, in terms of leadership in shaping the future of international trade to deliver a more just and prosperous world for all. I fully agree with the sentiment that was expressed by President Obama in his inauguration speech, where he measured the success of the American economy not just in gross domestic product at home, but in how that prosperity and opportunity is extended to others. So today I want to remake the case for openness, openness which will allow all our economies to trade their way out of trouble, and openness that will renew our global leadership credentials as advocates of free trade and opportunity for all. That global leadership should, in my view, be founded on coordinated action, and there's a lot of discussion at the moment of what that might consist of, and more than a little speculation on whether the United States and the European Union will see eye to eye. Reform of the institutions governing the global economy, clearly a necessity to allow emerging economies to take their rightful place at the table and to improve the supervisory functions of these institutions to make sure that we can avoid repetition of current events in the future. Here, the US has a proven track record, setting up the Bretton Woods institutions after the Second World War and establishing the World Trade Organization after the Uruguay round 15 years ago. US leadership and commitment will also now be needed if we're to reform these institutions. I believe that together the European Union and the United States can achieve this by investing again in effective multilateralism. Through that, we can ensure that global institutions we so badly need are up to the task and have the necessary tools to carry out their function. It's in our common interest. We hear a lot too about the importance of both fiscal stimulus and financial regulation in addressing the current crisis. Now, while these are vital, and I mean vital, to help to stabilise the situation and ensure it doesn't recur, there is a third equally vital component: maintaining and extending open trade. It's the motor of open trade that will provide the opportunities to generate wealth that will see us through this current downturn. And if we're really serious about keeping markets open, then we should have the courage and vision to deliver on the G20 commitments of last November. Our leaders made a pledge to refrain from raising new barriers to investment or trade in goods and services, imposing new export restrictions or implementing World Trade Organization inconsistent measures to stimulate exports. We must stick to that together. To truly deliver on those commitments made at the G20, we need to turn the rhetoric into the reality and complete the Doha round of World Trade talks. This agreement would add hundreds of billions of dollars to the world economy every year and allow the developing world to continue to lift its citizens out of poverty through the dignity of their own labour and the genius of their own ideas. Doha is also, too, our insurance policy against protectionism. Recent studies showed that if tariffs were raised to levels still allowed under the current World Trade Organization ceilings, global income could be reduced by at least $500 billion. That's a large chunk of the financial fiscal stimulus gone. In the European Union, we're committed to concluding Doha, something that the heads of all 27 governments in the European Union confirmed when they met at the beginning of this month. But we can't do the deal alone. and it certainly cannot be done without the United States. The administration has absolutely rightly and understandably made kickstarting the domestic economy their focus of their first 100 days. But time is not on our side if we're to get global trade moving again. We need to rebuild that confidence in the markets by taking the lead in the multilateral arena. And we need to strengthen the hand of the World Trade Organization as a model for international cooperation and coordination. And if the Doha round is concluded, it's certainly not just others that will gain, as some have already claimed. US exports to key markets in Europe, Asia, Latin America will grow, in some cases, at double-digit rates. The US trade deficit is expected to improve and US GDP would increase. And let me make a point about the impact on jobs. Our analysis shows that Doha will modestly improve real wages in all sectors of the United States economy for both skilled and unskilled workers, and that the net effect of the round will be job creating. So there is potentially a package good for the United States and the basis for moving forward towards a right deal at the right time. And let's not forget that only a rejuvenated Doha success can move a rejuvenated World Trade Organization onto the broader agenda which understandably the United States seeks. So in closing, I want to just look for a moment or two at our bilateral relationship. We know that before the current downturn, the global economic landscape was shifting. The emerging economies of Asia were gaining ground and had challenged the traditional world economic order. The downturn has not halted that process, but the transatlantic economy still remains the largest in the world, worth more than $3 trillion in commercial sales and employing more than 14 million workers. The largest chunk of this relationship consists of the stock of investment, worth $2 trillion, which is split more or less evenly. And it's worth recalling that US investment in Europe was 3 times more than in all of Asia in 2007. European Union investment in the United States in 2006 was 12 times the level of European Union investment in China and more than 28 times the level of investment in India. The figures illustrate the hard facts of the transatlantic economic relationship, and it makes sense to work towards further converging our market rules and removing existing barriers. On the flip side, our credibility will be undermined and our energy sapped if we persist in pursuing bilateral trade disputes through the World Trade Organization. We have the largest and deepest economic relationship in the world. It's inevitable that trade disputes arise from time to time, but we mustn't forget they affect less than 2% of our bilateral trade. The disputes aren't the results of high tariffs or other traditional trade barriers. They're regulatory in nature and often rooted in the different systems of regulation we have and also our cultural traditions. And that makes them difficult to solve. But we should try, because not doing so hurts us both, ties up the World Trade Organization machinery and our trade officials when they have more important projects to work on. I'm a great believer in dialogue, talking to each other about irritants before they become disputes and about disputes before they become sanctions. I'm determined that we work together to solve these legacy issues and to clear the way for a new era of cooperation that's based on mutual goals rather than mutual suspicion, and where disputes are replaced by deals. But we have the structures. The Transatlantic Economic Council is one example, and I want those structures to be put to better use. Regulatory convergence would solve 95% of the problems we face, but that requires both high-level political commitment and a lot of upstream work. We can agree on mutual recognition of accounting standards. We'll both be shortly engaged in major new projects to regulate our financial markets and implement an international agreement to reduce carbon emissions. I cannot think of a better moment to work together to make these laws convergent, compatible and mutually reinforcing. So, in the spirit of those United States TV shows I loved to watch when I was growing up, This is the moment in the current crisis when the hero of the hour appears. It's a time when the world is looking for the European Union and the United States to stand shoulder to shoulder and stand up for what we believe in, to show the courage and the leadership and the vision that's necessary to banish the forces of protectionism and to ensure a fair and just outcome for all. And while we know that real life isn't quite like television, I believe that the new administration has that courage, leadership and vision, and Europe is ready to stand side by side with its United States partner to win this fight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ashton. Let me start off with one question for you before we open the floor. And really it's to give you an opportunity to elaborate on one of the points that you touched on several times in your remarks. As you mentioned, U.S. unemployment has reached 8%. We've had about 2 million workers laid off in less than the last year, and the increasing rate, the unemployment rate is increasing at a faster pace now. We expect it to get worse before it gets better. Some recent studies have shown that after financial crises, the most persistent negative effect after the financial system has recovered and asset prices and house prices have recovered is that unemployment tends to persist an average of 7 years, and it persists longer, according to these studies, in the developed world than in the developing world for a variety of reasons that I think we can understand. That means that we're going to have this problem of unemployment, which is both the immediate cause of the collapse in demand because of not only the unemployed, but the job insecurity that infects everyone else. So we have the collapse in demand, which is leading to an actual contraction of world trade, in some cases rather dramatic when we see the falls in exports. And it's also the factor that does much to feed protectionism. So is there more that governments can be doing? Is there more that can be discussed in the transatlantic relationship about addressing the unemployment, the job insecurity, more vigorously, more directly, so that we don't have this ongoing undermining of existing trade, but also of confidence that open systems are worthwhile?
I was very pleased that you used the word confidence, because I think part of what's needed to stimulate demand from not least the vast majority of people who are in work and who are enjoying the benefits of low interest rates, if nothing else, is to have confidence in the market sufficiently that they will spend and use their resources well. I think in terms of unemployment, two things. One is this is a unique recession. The whole of the world has gone down together. Normally, you go into recession, Europe will follow you, or vice versa, and so on. And we have massive stimulus packages coming in across the world, necessary to keep the economies moving. I was interested when I looked at the breakdown of what's happened in the United States, that part of what is being included in the package is, of course, money for education and training. And I'm a believer, having spent part of my career working on economic regeneration, that if you are able to, in a smart way, use your resources to help people retrain for the jobs of the future, support industry to produce the products of the future. For example, we know issues of climate change provide huge opportunities for new products, goods, services. Then that will help us turn around more quickly. It's also important that we think about what that future will be. The products that we made 15 years ago, I always joke about, my iPod. I didn't have an iPod 15 years ago. Nobody made iPods 15 years ago because it didn't exist. Now they're a huge manufacturing base on technology. The goods of the future will be different. So the opportunity that we can afford people to retrain, reskill, re-equip, protecting, not protectionism, getting our industry ready for the economies of the future, I think could help turn that situation around, because for the first time we have huge stimulus packages going in.
Thank you. Let's open to your questions. Yes. And please identify yourself when you...
Yeah, Steve Charnovitz, George Washington University Law School. Thank you, Commissioner. That was as thoughtful and eloquent as of a defense for free trade as I've ever heard. So I wanted to complement that. You indicated back last fall that the G20 had said that they would resist protectionism, and then we see, I think it was a World Bank study said that 17 out of 20 had failed in that pledge. It seems like the politicians and bureaucrats maybe are not capable of resisting protectionism. So I'm wondering, you mentioned this Transatlantic Economic Council. What role do you see in that council for transatlantic cooperation of business groups, advisory business groups, labor groups, environmental groups, legislators of the EC in the United States, consumer groups? We had an effort like that in the Clinton administration of some transatlantic NGO and business cooperation. It seems to have lost its way in the Bush administration there.
I think the potential for the Transatlantic Economic Council is enormous. This particular version was set up between Chancellor Angela Merkel and President Bush in the German presidency of the European Union. And what I observe is that it has got the makings of a strong dialogue between exactly legislators, business, civil society, and the kind of the political wing of it, the commissioners and the administration. But it needs to think more strategically. And what I would like to see it do is in a sense, think about the future more, to look at what's coming towards us, whether that's on regulatory issues to do with where the science is moving, whether that's on the strategic partnership we need to have between ourselves to make sure that we deal with protectionist tendencies or issues, and that we know what we mean by that, or whether it's simply thinking through how do we work more closely as we develop our legislation so it fits together. All of that is, for me, a fundamental part of where I hope the new administration might consider taking this particular model. And certainly on protectionism per se, well, I've not seen the report. I'm trying to work out who the 3 countries are that didn't. That's the interesting thing. If anyone knows, please tell me. I think, I'm always conscious of being clear about the difference between the rhetoric and the reality of what political leaders say to their domestic audiences and what they actually do. And certainly that's something we have to be very mindful of. But the best way of tackling protectionism on a huge scale is to complete multilateral agreements and prevent it.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Paula Stern, the Stern Group, but I'd like to use the question period to ask you about this reference to reducing carbon emissions and that we may be close to an agreement between the U.S. and the EU. I just finished doing a paper for the Chatham House and the Atlantic Council for the G20 in which I called for a greener, grander global bargain on trade and said, look, we have to look at Copenhagen coming down the pike and think about multilateralism with regard to the WTO. But given the pressures and the lack of support, demonstrable support in the United States for the Doha round, that rather perhaps the WTO should be tasked with starting with plurilateral agreements to lower tariffs in environmental green-related goods, should start to tackle the fact that energy's not even been considered in the WTO and is such a big part of our whole climate change and question, and went on other concrete examples. I'm wondering, now that you're going to be seeing USTR designate Kirk, whether it would be more fruitful to start talking about using the WTO in these arena, as well as, for example, subsidies, energy-related subsidies that are very distorting, ethanol, other things, whether that would be a more fruitful approach than asking the U.S. again to pledge to try to finish the Doha round, which President Bush was not able to do after 7.5 or 8 years. So, this is about the G20 and going forward, and should the Doha round be the litmus test for dealing with multilateralism and liberalization of trade?
Paula, thank you for that. I mean, 2 or 3 things I would say on that. First of all, the point about the Doha round is it's on the table, and a lot of the hard work has already been done. You quite rightly talked about 7 years of work. I think Uruguay was 8 years, so it's still within its kind of the norm, if I can call it that. But you know, the fact you've got a deal that's largely got a lot of it done. There's more to do, of course. Is a place where we should begin. The idea of starting something brand new is, in a sense, we'd have to start all over again. So I think we have to first of all examine whether what's on the table is good enough to take us forward. And that will be a critical thing for Congress and for the administration to do. But the judgment they'll have to make is it's that versus nothing and having to start again. That's a very, very different proposition. I think in terms of plurilateral agreements, and I've been talking about this with industry here in the last couple of days, the problem, because I take the point, and I'll come on to the green issues in a moment, yes. But there is a genuine difficulty, which is that when you're doing a negotiation, it's because on the table you've got lots of different things that you can get what you want. And for some countries with whom we've been negotiating, they would see no advantage in doing an agreement on particular aspects of climate change, or perhaps, for example, on services, which is another issue I was talking about yesterday, because they don't gain anything much from services. We do, you do, but they don't. What they want is tariffs down to get their goods in return for services. So my experience as a trade negotiator is that it's because you've got different things on the table that you're able to negotiate a package that gives us, you, the advantage for your trade and also for them. And it's very, very difficult to find one issue where everybody gains by opening the market, or everybody gains to the same extent. So why should one country say, well, we'll give you a full agreement on, you know, X, when actually what they really want is Y? So that's the difficulty with it. Doesn't mean, I hasten to add, that I'm against or I wouldn't support opportunities where you can do things on particular issues. I just can't find my own way through the fact that for most countries I'm negotiating with, they're simply not interested in the big issues I might be. They want the things that they want. I think in terms of climate change, you're absolutely right to think about the potential of Copenhagen and what could happen. And I think there are enormous opportunities in trade for products, goods, services connected to what we need to do and we know we need to do on climate change. And I think real opportunities with some of our big trading partners to take that forward. China is an example. India is another example. Other parts of the world, very, very important in that. I think Copenhagen is going to be very, very difficult. I don't underestimate how difficult, nor do I underestimate how important it is. But certainly from a trade side, we want to have a good input into that and to make the points that I think you'd want us to in that.
Yes, in the middle here.
My name is Sean Marie Giroux. I'm with the company Trade Moves. We work with the National Confectioners Association, which represent manufacturers, importers, exporters of cocoa products, confectionery, everything from chocolate to chewing gum. And one of the issues that we're concerned with is bilateral trade disputes, and in particular the beef hormone dispute. As you probably know, there's about $50 million worth of 2 confectionery products currently on the proposed retaliation list. And we were encouraged to see that USTR has delayed implementation for 1 month of the 100% retaliatory duty. And the confectionery industry is highly integrated, as are many sectors transatlantically. And it's just there's a concern that is progress going to be made? Do we see the probability of success in resolving the trade dispute by April 23rd so that we do not see the tariffs, 100% tariffs imposed on any products coming from the European Union? Because these 2 products are, again, represent $50 million. That's 1/5 of the value of the trade retaliation. And there's just, I think, a lot of concern amongst multinationals, SMEs, that we want to see the bilateral trade, take that 2% that's affected on trade altogether, that's in trade disputes, and just take it off the table. So I appreciate your comments on opening bilateral trade and resolving some of these disputes. I'd like to hear where we are in terms of progress and if April 23rd is a viable date for a solution.
Thanks for that. I mean, you're absolutely right to point to the fact that although I said it was a small percentage, it's a hard-hitting small percentage if you're representing those involved with it. What I'm trying to do, and I was very pleased with the administration's decision to move back a month. And you may remember that when the carousel, as it's called, i.e. moving the different products around, was announced, I was very measured too in not responding in a retaliatory way. My Director General of Trade is somewhere at the back, and he's been in Washington a couple of weeks ago. He's back here now. The United States people have been out to us to try and work our way through it. I would like to try and find a solution. Whether I can achieve that, I'm not sure. But it won't be because we didn't all try. And, with these disputes, where we are is that we're both the good guys and the bad guys sometimes. That there are disputes that would go to litigation, spend up 2 to 3 years in Geneva being determined. We'd win some, you'd win some. That's how it works. I think it's much, much better if we can find a way through it. Now, some of it is about the different scientific basis. Some of it is about the interpretation, and some of it's about different cultural and other questions. I can't move 27 countries in one go, any more than I could move the United States Congress, or maybe you could, in one go. So we have to see how we can address the underlying issue, which is how do we keep trade moving, while not trying to undermine decisions that have been made by governments in both directions. So that's what we're looking to try and do. And if we're successful, then we'll be able to, I hope, move forward in that spirit and both resolve them before they get to this point. That's my real ambition. But actually try and find a way through this. And I hope we'll have done that by April 23rd. But I can't promise that I'll succeed. And that's not because the United States is being difficult. It's because it's a difficult issue to find a way through.
Commissioner, if you don't mind, I think I'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then we may get through more people's questions that way. Yes, in the third row.
Yes. I'm Jerry Hagstrom from National Journal's Congress Daily. We've just had a report today that Crawford Faulkner is resigning as the EU, or not the EU, but the WTO agricultural trade negotiator, or the head of that committee. It would seem like that's one more indication of a lack of faith that the Doha round is going to go any farther, and I just wondered if you had any reaction to his decision to leave.
You're ahead of me on news. Not surprisingly, because I've been on the Hill all morning. So I can't comment on why that is. What I would say is that Crawford's done a fantastic job, and there may be lots of reasons behind that. But no one individual, despite the incredible work they've done, is the determinant of whether we move forward or not. Simple as that.
Yes, in the front here, and then in the middle.
Hi, thanks. I'm Jamie Strawbridge from Inside U.S. Trade. I was just hoping you could say a little more, Commissioner, on 2 things having to do with short-term priorities on trade. Specifically, when you meet with Mr. Kirk, what will your main message be on trade and the things that you'd like to work with him on in the short term? And secondly, looking ahead to the G20 meeting in London on April 2nd, what specific outcomes on trade are you hoping for from that meeting? I mean, are you hoping for an extension of the November pledge on protectionism? Are you hoping that's even bolstered further? Are you hoping for something specific on Doha? If you could just give us a preview of that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Let's get the question in the middle here. Yes, Steve.
Tatiana Krzyzewska from the Cato Institute. My question will be that, as you have mentioned during your speech, we already have the World Trade Arena called WTO, and the idea basically was to bring as many members there as possible to have the world free for trade. But now you're talking about this U.S. and European Union Trade Council. don't you think that the rest of the world could treat it as separating or even segregating the trade, and that European Union and US would be acting in their own interest when it's like so difficult right now with the crisis? So my question is basically, don't you think that it can be a bad reaction from the rest of the world on this council? Thank you.
Let's take one more question in the back. The gentleman with the red tie. Yes.
Good afternoon. Michael Maybach with the European American Business Council. Thank you for being with us. We represent 70 U.S. and European companies. I wanted to ask about the WTO case on the Information Technology Agreement of 1997. Our European and American companies want to have zero tariff on IT products, and we think it's good for Europe and for their companies and citizens. Could you comment on the case?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for those three. Jamie, first to you, main messages for Mr. Kirk. Importance of trade generally. I mean, it's a bit like the speech, but condensed. Importance of trade generally, that we want to work closely with him and with Congress. Multilateral deals are essentially the best way forward. Please will he look at the Doha round and try and come to a conclusion as soon as he can. And this bilateral relationship, as I've described it, of a strong relationship, largest trading partners. Where do we take this further forward, and how do we work together to strengthen and deepen it in such a way that we're able to see issues and deal with them before they either turn into disputes or before we end up with different regimes, perhaps working more closely together can help our businesses trade more effectively. So it's all of those key messages, really, in that meeting that I hope to have with him. For the G20, I think, as you say, protectionism, very, very important to go back and reiterate and mean that we don't want to see protectionism and define that, support the World Trade Organization in the work that it's doing to identify and deal with protectionism, and to decide whether the G20 is committed to go and complete the Doha round and translate that into, well, what does that mean? That's what I would like to see happen from it. And I think, too, looking at trade finance, making sure that we've got in place the capacity to support trade by ensuring that credit's available. I think I describe it as the World Trade Organization versus bilateralism, is what you were saying. And interestingly, we have this debate quite often. In fact, we were having this debate, I think yesterday, with my team, about making sure that in strengthening this relationship across the Atlantic, it wasn't interpreted as a sign that we weren't open for business with the rest of the world, nor that we didn't care about the rest of the world, particularly the developing countries. And I have to say that I'm very worried about what's going to happen in some of our developing countries in the light of what will happen to them in this economic downturn. I worry because of their inability to be able to support their economies in the way that we've been able to. And I worry that they won't be able to trade effectively. And I worry that aid will not be as forthcoming. And that, I think, is a terrible kind of triple set of circumstances. We have to be very mindful of that. So I don't see this in any way as being not about America and the European Union looking outwards as well. But I'm just very conscious this is a strong relationship that we need to build on too. And I don't want those to be seen as contradictions. And it's very interesting that you went exactly where we were saying yesterday. We don't want people to go in thinking that. So you've helped me by making me realise we've got to get that message right in what we do as well. And in terms of the, Michael, you were saying about the ITA, the technological products. We're in Geneva at the moment, as you know. Now, we've put forward a proposal which America so far has not come back to us on, and we really hope they do, which is that the problem is the list of products that we wrote down 10 years ago bear no relation to the list of products that we have now. My Director General was saying, you know, we used to have printers. Well, nowadays, printers are printers, scanners, faxes. Mobile telephones do everything, apart from make the tea. I mean, there's a whole raft of changes, and actually products change so dramatically. What we need is a mechanism to be able to fast-track new products onto the list. So we're hoping, we're going to go back with a new offer, but we're really hoping that we can get a response on that, because that, I think, would be really, really important.
Shall we take another round of questions? In the very back, yes?
Checking if my things are on.
Commissioner, I'm Terry Townsend from the International Cotton Advisory Committee. As noted, you gave a very eloquent argument or defense of free trade and have spoken eloquently about the need for completing the Doha Round. Nevertheless, the Doha Round was supposed to have been done in 2005, and it's not done yet. I wonder if you could talk about alternatives. Are there other initiatives in addition to or perhaps beside the Doha Round that might move the world forward toward economic growth through expanded trade that would not rely on a completion of the Doha Round?
Yes, in the middle, the woman in the, yes.
Hi, I'm Sudha from Manchester Trade. My question is on economic partnership agreements. I would like you to throw some light on the status on it. It's a little confusing to know because the complete agreements were supposed to be signed by end of 2008, if I'm right. And what is the status of the interim agreements? Are they trading under the EPA rules? And do you have any idea when the complete agreements would be signed and if they would be signed? Thank you.
And one more question over on the side there, and then we'll come back.
Hi, I'm Doug Palmer with Reuters. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the negotiations over the beef hormone dispute with the United States. There's talk that what the EU is willing to offer is an increased quota for, I guess, non-hormone treated beef from the United States. Is that what is being discussed, and how much of an increase are we talking about?
Why don't we pause there for the Commissioner?
I think the first question was about alternatives to Doha. I suppose, as I said, you can look at it on the basis of saying, well, then we have a blank piece of paper, what do we do? But more likely, I think the reality is that nations, including the United States, certainly the European Union as a group of nations, will look more to its bilateral trade agreements. And for us, that will be trying to get agreements on a regional basis with other parts of the world, perhaps with the Andean community, with Central America, with parts of ASEAN and so on the basis that it's much better for business if you've got a group of countries that business is able to trade with on the same basis. I don't think it's a substitute. But I think that's where actually most large economies will look to try and keep their trade flowing. Better multilaterally, but that's what I think will happen. Economic partnership agreements, these are a requirement under World Trade Organization rules to tackle the difficulties where you have a historic relationship in parts of the world between European countries, which have offered those countries better access than other countries, and it tends to be the poorest countries across the world. And we were asked to level the playing field and came up with these economic partnership agreements. We're in the middle of negotiating what's called the interim agreements, the first stage, which actually makes us WTO compliant. And you're quite right that we should have completed it by now, but we haven't. And we haven't because the countries we're negotiating with have asked us to sit down with them and reflect on some of the key issues that are of concern to them, which I was very keen to do. So negotiations are continuing. We hope to resolve the final stages of the interim agreements in the course of this year, but I think we're some way off full agreements, which will take us, if you like, into the next stage. And I'm happy to talk about that separately with you if you'd like to. Doug, on the beef hormones, I'm only reluctant to talk about it because we're in the middle of the discussions on it. So, but I'm always very keen to make sure that we give you the information. If you give me your card, as soon as we've got any hard information, I'm very happy to give it to you.
We'll call you. Yes, here in the front.
But I really will call you.
Okay. Irving Williamson, the U.S. International Trade Commission. Talking about the economic partnership agreements, I was wondering your thoughts on how the U.S. and the EU should be cooperating in terms of development, helping developing countries, and whether or not requiring the MFN clause where the EU gets from any of its EPA partners the best agreements they negotiate with anyone else. Is that consistent with our ability to cooperate, especially when you're demanding reverse preferences and all of that? And then maybe comment on your views versus the U.S. view about the role of Brazil and India in bringing the Doha round to a close. Thank you.
Yes, in the back.
Julie Howard from the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa. Another developing country sort of issue. Last year we went through the beginning of the global food price crisis, and we saw, as you correctly noted, sort of increase in pushing up tariffs and export bans. With the future of Doha, we would like to think optimistic, but reality chimes in. Is there something we could do, I think following up on Terry's question, an alternative or an early harvest from Doha where the countries, there might be some leadership to stop future export bans, or it might be some kind of enforcement particularly targeted to food and humanitarian aid?
Yes, and one more question in the middle here, and then we'll go to Commissioner Ashton.
Christopher Wink, U.S. Chamber of Commerce Commissioner. A couple questions. First of all, could you tell us about your visit to Capitol Hill, the lawmakers that you met with, and what sort of reaction you got from them, particularly on the Doha round? And also wanted to ask you about the EU-Korea free trade agreement negotiations. There has been some speculation there's going to be an announcement in London about that. So if you could elaborate on that, please.
It's great having a very well-informed audience, let me tell you. Back to economic partnership agreements to begin with. MFN clause, for those who may not know, and I certainly didn't until I took this job, is called the most favoured nation clause. The access that we're trying to give for countries is also linked to the support we want to give them in development. And the European Union is pledged to provide levels of support which will enable those economies to develop their industries in order that they can compete. It is my view that we want to see self-sustaining, sovereign nations competing successfully with all of us. And as a consequence, they will buy our products too. So in the long term, there's a good benefit to us all. But it is about development and trade working together. The requirement of the 27 member states is this, that if they're going to do that, if there comes a point when those countries are able to lower tariffs on another aspect of their products, then we should get the benefit of that lower tariff too. And it's fundamentally to say there are some economies in the world who do nothing to support the developing world, but who would come in and want to do trade agreements from which we would not benefit. Now, I've explained this to many, many of the trade ministers across the African, Caribbean and Pacific world. And to be fair to them, they have understood exactly why we feel that that's important. We have moved and dealt with many of the other issues that they've got, but it is an issue that we feel actually is a fair one. It's not going to affect their ability to conclude their agreements. And it was originally trapped in the idea that this was affecting their policy space. Well, I don't think it does. But we're still in dialogue about it. But that's the fundamental basis of it. And as I say, so far, I think people understand what we're trying to do, even if they're not as comfortable with it as we would like them to be. Julie, I don't know about an early harvest from Doha. You make some very, very important points about food and humanitarian aid. And I can't give you a very good answer because I don't know enough about those issues to sound other than really just skating on the surface. I do think anything that we can do that is going to try and support countries that are going to go through extraordinarily difficult times in terms of food aid and in terms of humanitarian aid, we ought to do in any event as individual nations and collectively as far as we possibly can. Whether there's something to be done through the WTO, I don't know. But I'll certainly ask Pascal Lamy about that because I think you make a very, very interesting and important point on that. And Chris, you asked me who we'd seen. I've been seeing the Ways and Means Committee, essentially, and the Trade Subcommittee members, an informal session where they came to talk to me and I to them about what I was doing there. It was extremely good from my point of view. Lots of the issues you've raised here were the issues that we discussed, and in similar vein. And of course, they are very concerned now to look carefully at the legislation and the implications of where the administration might want to go, and for themselves as a Congress to decide their own views on Doha and beyond. And EU-Korea, well, we haven't set final meetings. We are in the final stages of negotiation on the Korean deal. We believe from the European Commission it's a very, very good deal for Europe, and I really do hope we're able to conclude it very soon.
Commissioner, I'd like to take one more round of
Yeah,
questions
of
if you have the time. Very good. So let's start out in the very back. The gentleman.
And thank you for coming. I'm Jim Berger from Washington Trade Daily. I believe that one of the reasons your Gray Round took 8 years to complete was the economic downturn of the 1980s. Can the Doha round survive a 2 or 3 year hiatus?
Gosh. Here in the middle, yes.
I'm Maria Riley from the Center of Concern, and I'm going to ask a heretical question. The United States has written into its law protectionist measures, such as Buy America or Buy American. It's got 2 of them in there. And we heard there was a little upsquabble about that with the stimulus package. And I'm of the mind that some forms of protectionism are legitimate for political, economic, or social reasons. And we also know that the Cambridge scholar Han Sung has talked about the fact that the Doha round of negotiations has taken away policy space that the European Union nations used and the U.S. used in our developmental process, which allowed us to make the progress that we have made. So I would just like to raise the question about legitimate protectionism and say if we could come to some agreement on that, maybe then the dialogue could be around what would be legitimately protectionistic for any given country or a situation and what is not. I know that the word itself is anathema.
Yes, in the front here.
Commissioner Sam Gilston with Washington Tariff and Trade Letter. You spoke about the need for the European Union and the U.S. to lead by the Transatlantic Economic Council and also in the Doha round. But the stories coming out of Europe suggest that Europe is more divided than anybody else in dealing with the recession and the economic problems, divisions between Western Europe and Eastern Europe and how to approach it, and things coming out of France and Germany and Hungary. So how can Europe move forward seeking this confidence building when they still have a problem dealing with it at home? And in that same vein, in talking about the Transatlantic Economic Council, I think this is maybe the 5th or 6th iteration of an attempt to do that. Why doesn't the U.S. and European Union just start moving towards a free trade agreement?
Now, do we have an easy question? Just kidding. Commissioner.
Well, again, thank you. I mean, Jim, you asked about whether Doha could survive a 2 to 3 year hiatus. Well, I suppose I've got 2 answers to that. The first one is no. I think it will be gone because I can't imagine the circumstances in which a 2 to 3 year hiatus would not be because a firm decision had been taken that the deal was not right. And I don't much see how that could change. And then I'm going to answer it differently and say, well, it depends on why the hiatus happened. You know, I think what will be very, very important is that we're not just waiting for the recession to continue on its downward path to the point where people grab a deal. I think one of the messages that I felt came clearly from Congress, and I think is very clear from this administration and very clear in the European Union, is we know we've got to get on with it, whatever it is, whether it's a financial stimulus, whether it's sorting out the institutions, whether it's trade, we have to do it and get on with it. We can't afford to wait. So my ambition is that the decisions are taken that we go to do Doha soon and that we get on with it. Having said that, this is in large part at this stage about building confidence in the system because completing the modalities of Doha does not give us a deal. It will take some time after that and some time beyond that for many of the points about Doha to kick in. But the confidence we'll send, the signal we'll send that the world is open for business, I think is a really, really important one. And it will avoid the move backwards into protectionism, which, of course, was the second question. Buy America, well, it's been in your legislation, I think, since 1979. The government procurement agreement has been a satisfactory way in which, from the European Union side, we've been able to collaborate on infrastructure projects and so on, and have felt the benefit of the relationship and not the negative side. Our concern when the legislation reappeared was to be clear that it was the same. In other words, it wasn't different. And if you look at the wording of the legislation, it says that this legislation should apply, I forget the exact wording, but in this, looking to international agreements that have been signed. In other words, that those should fit together. And I was reassured on Capitol Hill this morning that that is indeed what they would expect to see, in which case that's fine. But your point about acceptable levels of protectionism, well, the trouble is protectionism means something, and it means that you have raised your barriers to prevent trade operating. And if you do that, the effect is that it spirals into downturn, into recession, into potential depression. In other words, we know what happens if we do it. I understand completely, and this is the point I was making about the difference between protect and protectionism. It is absolutely right and proper that governments should invest in supporting their industries for the future, supporting their industries, businesses and people through this difficult time. That's not protectionism. It's protectionism when you say we're going to prop this up and we're going to put the barriers up and prevent the trade from operating, because what happens is you lose out, because trade barriers come up elsewhere, trading ceases, and economies spiral down. So there isn't a form of protectionism that is beneficial. It doesn't exist. There is a form of protecting and supporting your industries to develop for the future that is absolutely right and proper. And I suspect if you and I sat down together, we'd have the same agenda. I don't actually think that what you're after is what that word means. What you're after is making sure that governments are supporting industries and businesses and growing those businesses and industries domestically in order for them to move forward in the future. That's quite different to saying you close up the markets, which is what protectionism actually means, in my view. European Union divided. Well, there are big differences. It's not, as you know, it's 27 countries. There are big differences in the economies across Europe. The biggest economies are very different to the smallest economies. East and West are very different. There are robust discussions, I don't deny that, across Europe about making sure that we've got the right packages in place, just as the robust discussions in Congress and everywhere else. That's what governments need to do when they're facing situations that are unique. What's been very good about the European Union and the Commission is where we've got to is a clear understanding and a clear vision and purpose for how we go forward. Does it mean support to different economies in Europe will have to be different? Yes, it does. Because what's going to happen in the Eastern European economies, which we're looking at carefully, may mean that we need to support them differently in a different way across the European Union to the way that we're supporting some of the other economies. So it's a picture, it's a jigsaw puzzle of 27 countries coming together. The picture is the European Union, but the pieces are different and the way in which we need to support them. But there really is not the kind of deep level fighting or controversial disparity of view in the European Union that sometimes you might think from reading the press. Sorry to the press here, but you know what I mean. It just isn't like that. There is genuine debate and dialogue about what should we do and to what extent, and how far does one approach match another. But that's what should happen in my view.
Commissioner, let me thank you for being so generous and sharing your time and your views with us, and let me invite the audience to also appreciate